The ambulance sirens cut through the humid evening air as Sarah Chen finished checking the supply closet for the third time that shift. At 23, she had been working at St. Mary's Military Hospital for only 6 weeks, and the constant stream of wounded soldiers from overseas still made her stomach clench with nervous energy. Her supervisor, Nurse Patterson, had warned her that working in the trauma wing would test every skill she learned in nursing school, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of treating young men and women whose bodies bore the violent signatures of war. Sarah adjusted her blue scrubs and walked toward the nurse's station, where the overhead monitor displayed incoming patient information. The red text scrolled across the screen: multiple casualties inbound, ETA 7 minutes. Prepare trauma bays 1 through 4. She felt her pulse quicken as she grabbed fresh gloves and checked her pocket for the small notebook where she kept track of medication schedules and patient notes. The automatic doors burst open as the first stretcher rolled through, followed by 2 more in quick succession. Sarah was assigned to Trauma Bay 3, where a young soldier lay unconscious, his uniform torn and bloody. The paramedic rattled off vital signs and injury details as they transferred him to the hospital bed. 22-year-old male, blast injury to left leg, possible concussion, lost consciousness twice during transport. As Sarah began cutting away the soldier's damaged uniform, she noticed his dog tags caught in the fabric. She carefully freed them, reading the name Marcus Thompson stamped into the metal. His face was pale beneath dirt and dried blood, and she estimated he was probably close to her own age. A large bandage covered most of his left thigh, already soaked through with blood that needed immediate attention. Dr. Rodriguez arrived and began barking orders while Sarah worked to establish an 4-line. Her hands trembled slightly as she searched for a good vein, knowing that every second counted in trauma situations. The soldier's breathing was shallow but steady, and his pulse, while rapid, remained strong. She managed to get the 4 started on her second attempt and began hanging the prescribed fluids. "Good work, Chen, Dr. Rodriguez said without looking up from examining the leg wound. "We need to get him to surgery within the next 30 minutes. Keep monitoring his vitals and watch for signs of shock." Sarah nodded, making notes on the chart while keeping one eye on the monitors displaying heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Sarah had finished her shift and should have gone home, but something kept her in the hospital cafeteria, drinking terrible coffee and thinking about the young soldier. She had worked with dozens of patients since starting her job, but there was something about Marcus Thompson that she couldn't shake. Maybe it was how young he looked, or the way his dog tags had felt warm in her palm when she freed them from his torn shirt. When her shift began the next evening, Sarah learned that Marcus had survived surgery but remained unconscious. The blast had severely damaged his left leg, requiring multiple procedures to repair shattered bone and torn muscle. Dr. Rodriguez explained that while the physical injuries would heal with time, the head trauma remained a concern. "We're monitoring for brain swelling and other complications," he told her during rounds. "Some patients wake up in a few hours, others take days or weeks." Sarah was assigned to his care, which meant checking his vitals every 2 hours, administering medications, and watching for any changes in his condition. She found herself talking to him during quiet moments, telling him about the weather outside or describing what was happening on the television mounted on the wall. The nursing textbook said that unconscious patients might still be able to hear, and Sarah hoped her voice might provide some comfort in whatever darkness surrounded him. On her 3rd day caring for Marcus, Sarah noticed small changes that gave her hope. His fingers would occasionally twitch when she adjusted his blankets, and his eyelids would flutter during certain medical procedures. She documented every detail in his chart, knowing that even tiny improvements could indicate healing brain function. Late one evening, when the hospital had grown quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft footsteps of night staff, Sarah was adjusting Marcus's pillow when his hand suddenly moved. Not just a twitch this time, but a deliberate movement that grabbed her wrist. Her heart jumped as she looked down at his face, still appearing unconscious but with slightly more color than before. "Marcus," she whispered, not wanting to startle him if he was beginning to wake up. "Can you hear me?" His grip on her wrist tightened, and she felt her pulse racing. This was exactly what the doctors had been waiting for, the first real sign that he might be emerging from unconsciousness. She reached for the call button to alert Dr. Rodriguez, but Marcus's grip held her in place. His breathing had changed, becoming more irregular, and she could see rapid eye movement beneath his closed lids. Sarah knew from her training that this could indicate he was transitioning between different levels of consciousness, a potentially critical moment in his recovery. "I'm here," she said softly, placing her free hand gently on his shoulder. "You're safe. You're in the hospital, and you're going to be okay." She had no idea if he could understand her words, but she hoped her calm tone might help orient him to his surroundings if he was indeed beginning to wake up. The minutes stretched on as Sarah stood beside his bed, her wrists still held in his surprisingly strong grip. She found herself studying his face more carefully than she had during previous shifts. He had dark brown hair that needed cutting, and she noticed a small scar above his left eyebrow that looked older than his recent injuries. His hands, despite being rough from military service, held hers with unexpected gentleness. Suddenly, his eyes opened. Not gradually, like she had expected, but, all at once, wide and alert and filled with confusion. He looked directly at her, and Sarah saw intelligence and awareness in his gaze that hadn't been there moments before. His mouth opened as if he was trying to speak, but only a small sound emerged. "Take it slow," Sarah advised, maintaining eye contact while reaching again for the call button. "You've been unconscious for several days. Do you know where you are?" Marcus's eyes darted around the room, taking in the medical equipment, the white walls, and the window showing darkness outside. When his gaze returned to her face, she saw the exact moment when awareness fully returned. His lips moved again, and this time Sarah could make out a whispered word, "water." She smiled, feeling relief flood through her entire body. A request for water was a wonderful sign. It meant he was oriented enough to recognize his basic needs and could communicate them clearly. "I'll get you some ice chips," she told him, gently trying to free her wrist from his grip. "Small amounts at first, until we make sure you can swallow properly." Marcus released her hand and attempted to push himself up in the bed, wincing as the movement reminded him of his injured leg. "Easy," Sarah cautioned, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. "You've had major surgery on your leg. The doctors will want to examine you now that you're awake." She finally managed to press the call button, and, within minutes, Dr. Rodriguez arrived with 2 other medical staff members. What followed was a series of tests to evaluate Marcus's neurological function and overall condition. Sarah watched from the corner of the room as the doctors checked his reflexes, asked him questions about his memory, and explained his injuries and the treatment he had received. Throughout the examination, Marcus's eyes kept returning to her face, as if seeking reassurance from the one familiar presence in the room. When the medical team finally left, promising to return in the morning for more comprehensive testing, Sarah approached his bed again. "How are you feeling?" she asked, adjusting his blankets and checking the 4-line that had somehow become twisted during the examination. "Like I got hit by a truck," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse from days of intubation during surgery. "But alive, thanks to you and everyone here." He paused, studying her face carefully. "You're the nurse who's been taking care of me, aren't you? I remember your voice." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I'm Sarah Chen. I've been on your case since you arrived." She pulled up a chair beside his bed, knowing that newly awakened trauma patients often had questions and needed emotional support along with medical care. "Sarah," he repeated, as if testing how her name sounded. "I'm Marcus, but I guess you already know that from my chart." He attempted a smile, though it was clear that even small facial movements caused him discomfort. For the next hour, Sarah found herself in the longest conversation she had ever had with a patient. Marcus told her fragments of what he remembered from before his injury, a routine patrol that had gone wrong when their convoy hit an improvised explosive device. He described the sound of the blast and the confusion that followed, though many details remained hazy due to his head injury. Sarah shared appropriate details about his treatment and recovery timeline, but found herself also talking about things outside the hospital. She told him about the early autumn weather, about the coffee shop across the street where she sometimes went between shifts, and about her cat, Mr. Whiskers, who had the annoying habit of sitting on her nursing textbooks when she tried to study at home. As the night progressed, Sarah noticed how easy it was to talk with Marcus. Despite their dramatic first meeting and the serious nature of his injuries, he had a gentle sense of humor and asked thoughtful questions about her work and background. She learned that he had grown up in a small town in Ohio, had joined the Army straight out of high school, and was hoping to study engineering when his service ended. When her shift concluded at dawn, Sarah felt reluctant to leave. She had never experienced such a personal connection with a patient, and the professional boundaries that nursing school had emphasized seemed less clear than they had the day before. Marcus appeared to sense her hesitation. "Will you be back tonight?" he asked as she gathered her things. "I mean, for your next shift?" "Yes," Sarah replied, surprised by how much she was already looking forward to continuing their conversation. "I'll be here. Get some rest, and work with the physical therapy team when they come around. The more you cooperate with treatment, the faster you'll recover." As Sarah walked through the hospital parking garage toward her car, she found herself replaying every moment of Marcus's awakening. She had witnessed many patients regain consciousness during her short career, but none had affected her quite like this. There was something about the way he had held her wrist, the trust in his eyes when he first woke up, and the genuine interest he had shown in her as a person rather than just his caregiver. The drive home through the quiet morning streets gave her time to process the emotions that had caught her off guard. Sarah prided herself on maintaining professional relationships with patients, understanding that emotional attachment could cloud medical judgment and create ethical complications. But, as she parked outside her small apartment building, she had to admit that Marcus Thompson had already become more than just another patient in her care. Inside her apartment, Mr. Whiskers greeted her with typical feline indifference, more interested in breakfast than in hearing about her eventful shift. Sarah fed him and, then, sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea, trying to make sense of what she was feeling. She had always been attracted to men who were intelligent and kind, and, despite their brief acquaintance, Marcus had demonstrated both qualities clearly. But he was also a patient under her direct care, which created a complex ethical situation that nursing school had touched on but never fully explored. Sarah knew she needed to be careful not to let personal feelings interfere with her professional responsibilities, especially during Marcus's vulnerable recovery period. As she finally settled into bed as the morning sun streamed through her bedroom curtains, Sarah's last thought before falling asleep was wondering what Marcus was experiencing as he spent his first conscious day in the hospital. She hoped he would continue recovering quickly, even as a small part of her hoped it wouldn't be so quick that he would be discharged before she could understand what was happening between them. Sarah arrived for her evening shift with an unusual mixture of professional anticipation and personal nervousness. She had spent most of her sleep thinking about Marcus, which was entirely unlike her typical patient relationships. During her pre-shift briefing, she learned that he had experienced a good day, working with physical therapy and showing continued neurological improvement. The day nurse reported that he had been asking when Sarah would return, which sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. When she entered his room, Marcus was sitting up in bed, looking significantly more alert than he had 12 hours earlier. His color had improved, and someone had helped him shave, which made him appear younger and less like a trauma patient. He smiled when he saw her, and Sarah noticed how the expression completely transformed his face. "You came back," he said, and there was relief in his voice that seemed to go beyond normal patient appreciation for nursing care. "Of course I did," Sarah replied, checking his chart and noting the day's progress reports. "How did physical therapy go? I heard you impressed them with your determination." She was proud of how professional she managed to sound while her heart rate had definitely increased upon seeing him. Marcus shifted carefully in the bed, mindful of his healing leg. "It hurt more than I expected, but the therapist said that was normal. She thinks I'll be able to start putting weight on it within a few weeks if everything continues healing properly." He paused, watching Sarah as she checked his FOR and recorded his vital signs. "She also said I have you to thank for how well I'm doing. Apparently, you went above and beyond during my first few days here." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just did my job. Any nurse would have provided the same level of care." Even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. She had spent more time with Marcus than standard patient protocols required, and her attention to his care had been more detailed than usual. "Maybe," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe her deflection. But the other nurses tell me you stayed past your shifts to check on me, and that you were the one who noticed the small signs that I was beginning to wake up. That sounds like more than just doing your job. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Rodriguez arriving for evening rounds. He was pleased with Marcus's progress and discussed plans for gradually increasing physical therapy intensity and potentially moving him from the trauma wing to a regular recovery room within a few days. After the doctor left, Sarah found herself alone with Marcus again, and the atmosphere felt different somehow. A regular room, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. That means I won't be in your section anymore, doesn't it? Sarah nodded, surprised by the disappointment she felt at the thought. Trauma patients get moved to general recovery once they're stable. It's a good thing, it means you're healing well. She tried to inject enthusiasm into her voice, but Marcus seemed to hear something else entirely. But we won't see each other every day, he said, and it was clearly a statement rather than a question. Well, I could stop by during my rounds, Sarah offered, then immediately wondered if that was appropriate. I mean, to check on your progress. We like to follow up on trauma cases. She was definitely stretching the truth about normal hospital protocols. Marcus studied her face carefully. Sarah, can I ask you something that might be completely inappropriate? Her heart began beating faster. What is it? Is there a policy against hospital staff and patients? I mean, after the patient is discharged, would it be possible to? He struggled with the words, clearly as uncertain about the boundaries as she was. You're asking if we could see each other outside the hospital, Sarah said, finishing his thought. Yes, but only if that's something you might want to. I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position or get you in trouble with your job. Marcus's concern for her professional situation touched her more than she had expected. Sarah sat down in the chair beside his bed, knowing this conversation required more honesty than she had planned to offer. There are guidelines about relationships between staff and patients, but they're mainly designed to protect patients from being taken advantage of during vulnerable periods. After discharge, when the medical relationship ends, the rules become less clear. So it's possible? It's possible, she admitted, feeling as if she was crossing a line just by saying the words. But, Marcus, you're still recovering from serious injuries, and you've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes patients develop feelings for their caregivers that aren't really about the person, but about gratitude for the care received. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. I've thought about that, he finally said. I've been trying to figure out if what I'm feeling is just gratitude or something else entirely. He met her eyes directly. I think it's something else. Sarah felt her professional resolve wavering. What makes you think that? Because when I think about you, it's not just about how you took care of me when I was unconscious. It's about how you laugh when you tell me stories about your cat, and how you listen to me when I talk about my family back home. It's about how smart you are, and how you can explain medical procedures in ways that make sense to someone who barely graduated high school. Marcus shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. And it's about how I feel better just having you in the room, not because you're my nurse, but because you're you. The sincerity in his voice made Sarah's chest tight with emotion. Marcus. I know this is complicated, he continued. And I know I'm still a patient and you're still my nurse. But in a few weeks, I won't be a patient anymore, and you'll still be the person I can't stop thinking about. He reached for her hand, the same gentle touch she remembered from when he had first awakened. Would you at least consider the possibility of getting to know each other under different circumstances? Sarah looked down at their joined hands and made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Yes, she said quietly. I'll consider it. The next few days established a routine that pushed the boundaries of professional relationships while staying within the technical limits of hospital policy. Sarah continued providing excellent medical care, but their interactions became longer and more personal. She learned about Marcus's childhood in rural Ohio, his decision to join the military, and his dreams of studying engineering. He learned about her nursing school experience, her close relationship with her immigrant parents, and her love of hiking in the mountains outside the city. Dr. Rodriguez approved Marcus's transfer to the General Recovery Wing, and Sarah felt genuinely sad to see him go. His new room was 3 floors away from her trauma unit, but she found reasons to visit during her breaks. The other nurses in trauma began teasing her about her frequent absences, though their comments remained good-natured. "Sarah's got a boyfriend on the 3rd floor," Nurse Patterson announced during one shift change. "Don't worry, honey, we've all been there. Just remember to keep your priorities straight while he's still a patient." The warning was gentle but clear, and Sarah knew her colleagues had noticed her unusual behavior. She tried to be more discreet about her visits to Marcus's room, but found it difficult to stay away. Their conversations had become the highlight of her workdays, and she looked forward to his stories and observations with an anticipation that definitely exceeded professional interest. One evening, Sarah arrived at Marcus's room to find him sitting in the chair by the window rather than lying in bed. He was wearing hospital-issued pants and a t-shirt instead of a hospital gown, and the change made him look less like a patient and more like an ordinary young man. The improvement in his appearance made her realize how much he had healed since that first frightening night in trauma. "You're looking more like yourself," she commented, settling into the visitor's chair across from him. "I'm starting to feel more like myself too," Marcus replied. "Physical therapy said I might be able to try walking with crutches tomorrow. And the doctor thinks I could be discharged within the week if I keep improving at this rate." Sarah felt a complex mix of happiness for his recovery and sadness at the approaching end of their daily interaction. "That's wonderful news. Your leg must be healing well." "It is, but that's not what I wanted to talk to you about." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his expression becoming serious. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what happens after I leave here, and I have something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "I'm being medically discharged from the army. The leg injury is going to heal, but not well enough for active duty. I've got about 6 months of medical leave, and then I'll be officially civilian again." He paused, watching her reaction. "The thing is, I don't have anywhere specific I need to be. My family is in Ohio, but I was thinking about staying in this area, maybe applying to the state university for their engineering program." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "You're thinking about staying here?" "I'm thinking about staying near here," Marcus clarified. "But only if I have a reason to stay. Only if you think we might have something worth exploring once I'm no longer your patient." The directness of his question took her breath away. "Marcus, that's a big decision to base on someone you've only known for 2 weeks." "You're right, it is a big decision. But here's the thing, I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Not just because you saved my life, but because of who you are when you think no one is watching. Because you talk to unconscious patients like they can hear you. Because you remember that I mentioned missing my mom's cooking and you brought me a homemade sandwich that reminded me of home." Marcus's voice grew softer. "Because when I look at you, I see someone I could fall in love with, if I haven't already." Sarah stared at him, her professional training warring with emotions that had grown stronger every day. "You said if you haven't already. What does that mean?" "It means I think I'm already in love with you," Marcus admitted, his honesty cutting through all the careful boundaries she had tried to maintain. "And I think you might feel something similar, even if you can't say it while I'm still a patient." The truth of his words hit her like a physical force. She had been falling in love with him too, despite every professional instinct telling her to maintain emotional distance. The realization was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. "I do," she whispered, finally, admitting to herself what she had been trying to deny. "I feel something similar." Marcus smiled, and the warmth in his expression made her feel as if the entire room had become brighter. "Then, maybe we should figure out what that means, once I'm discharged and we can explore it properly." "Maybe we should," Sarah agreed, feeling as if she was stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. 2 days later, Marcus successfully walked the length of the hospital corridor using crutches, marking the final milestone necessary for his discharge. Sarah watched from the nurse's station as he made his careful but determined way down the hall, and felt pride in his recovery mixed with anticipation for what would come next. Dr. Rodriguez signed the discharge papers that afternoon, scheduling follow-up appointments for physical therapy and surgical checkups. Marcus would be staying at a nearby extended stay hotel while he attended outpatient therapy, with the goal of transitioning to completely independent living within a few weeks. On his last evening as a patient, Sarah visited his room after her shift ended. She was no longer his assigned nurse, which technically meant their professional relationship had concluded. The distinction felt important, even if it was more symbolic than practical. "Tomorrow you'll be a civilian again," she said, settling into the familiar chair beside his bed one last time. "Tomorrow I'll be free to ask you out on a proper date," Marcus replied, and there was excitement in his voice along with nervousness. "And I'll be free to say yes," Sarah responded, feeling her own mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. Marcus reached into the small bag of personal belongings that had been returned to him. "Before that happens, though, I have something I want to give you." He pulled out his military dog tags, the same ones Sarah had carefully freed from his bloody uniform on that first night. "I know this might seem weird, but these have been with me through everything overseas, and they were with me when you saved my life. I want you to have them." Sarah looked at the dog tags, remembering how they had felt in her hand during those first critical moments of his care. "Marcus, these are important to you." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. They represent who I was, but not necessarily who I'm becoming. And I want you to have something that connects to the beginning of whatever this is between us." He placed the dog tags gently in her palm, and she felt the same warmth she remembered from that first night. As Sarah held the dog tags, she noticed something she hadn't seen before in the dim light of the trauma bay. Along with Marcus's name and serial number, there was a small engraving on the back of one tag that looked like a military designation she didn't recognize. "What does this marking mean?" she asked, pointing to the small engraving. Marcus looked at where she was pointing and his expression suddenly changed, becoming serious in a way she hadn't seen since he first woke up. "What marking?" "Those are standard issue tags." Sarah held them closer to the light. "This inscription here, it looks like letters and numbers, but it's not your serial number." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah sensed there was something significant about her observation that he hadn't expected her to notice. "Can you read what it says exactly?" Sarah squinted at the small engraving. "It looks like RB7 Alpha, but the light in here makes it hard to be completely certain." The color drained from Marcus's face, and he sat up straighter in his bed despite the pain the movement clearly caused him. "Say that again." "RB7 Alpha," Sarah repeated, confused by his reaction. "Is that some kind of unit designation?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus stared at her with an expression that had shifted from surprise to something approaching shock. "Sarah, where did you serve before you became a nurse?" "I didn't serve anywhere. I went straight from high school to nursing school." "Why are you asking?" "Because RB7 Alpha isn't a unit designation," Marcus said slowly, his voice taking on a strange quality. "It's a call sign that was used by a medical transport unit that saved my entire squad during a mission that went wrong about 8 months ago. A mission where we lost radio contact and were pinned down for 12 hours before someone managed to call in a medical evacuation that saved all our lives." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "That's quite a coincidence." "It's not a coincidence," Marcus continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "The medical transport unit that saved us had a crew chief who guided the pilot through enemy territory to reach our location. The person who coordinated our rescue and talked us through keeping our wounded stabilized until help arrived. We never got their real name, but their call sign was RB7 Alpha." Sarah's hands began to tremble as she held the dog tags, though she couldn't understand why his story was affecting her so strongly. "Marcus, I don't understand what this has to do with me." "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "what's your middle name?" "Rebecca," she answered automatically, then felt her world tilt as the significance of his question became clear. "And your last name is Chen." RB could stand for Rebecca, and if you were involved with any kind of military medical operation. Marcus's voice trailed off as he studied her face carefully. "But I've never been in the military," Sarah insisted, though something deep in her memory was stirring, something she couldn't quite grasp. Marcus continued watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Sarah Rebecca Chen. RB. And if you had any involvement with medical support operations, any training or volunteer work with military medical units. Suddenly, a memory surfaced that Sarah had completely forgotten. During her final semester of nursing school, she had participated in a volunteer program that provided emergency medical communication support for overseas operations. Students were assigned call signs and worked with military medical coordinators to provide guidance in emergency situations. She had only done it for a few months, and it had seemed so removed from real situations that she had barely thought about it since graduation. "Oh my God," she whispered, the realization hitting her with full force. "You remember," Marcus said, and it wasn't a question. "I did volunteer work during nursing school. Medical communication support for overseas operations. We were given call signs and would help coordinate emergency medical situations via radio." Sarah's voice became stronger as the memories returned. "My call sign was RB7 Alpha. But, Marcus, there were dozens of operations I provided support for. How could you possibly know that one specific mission was one I was involved in?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then reached for her hands. "Because after that mission, when we were all safe and recovering, I asked my commanding officer if there was any way to contact the person who had guided our rescue. I wanted to thank them personally for saving our lives." "What did he tell you?" "He said that the medical communication volunteers were all nursing students, and that their identities were kept confidential for security reasons. But he did tell me that RB7 Alpha had been commended for exceptional performance during our rescue." Marcus squeezed her hands gently. "He said the volunteer had stayed on the radio for 14 hours straight, coordinating not just our rescue but 2 other emergency operations that same day." Sarah remembered that day now with crystal clarity. It had been her longest shift in the volunteer program, and she had been exhausted but determined to see every operation through to successful completion. There had been one mission in particular where she had talked a group of wounded soldiers through basic trauma care while guiding their rescue team through difficult terrain to reach them. "You were there," she said, understanding flooding through her. "You were one of the soldiers I talked through keeping pressure on wounds and monitoring vital signs. I was the one who thought we were all going to die until your voice came through the radio," Marcus confirmed. "You told us exactly what to do to keep our most seriously wounded squad member stable until the medical team could reach us. And you stayed with us on that radio, talking us through every step, until we were all safely evacuated." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as the full magnitude of the connection became clear. "I never knew what happened after the evacuations. We weren't given follow-up information about the people we helped. We all made it," Marcus told her. "Every single member of my squad survived because of the guidance you provided. And I've been carrying those dog tags ever since, with your call sign engraved on them, hoping that someday I might be able to thank the person who saved our lives." "You had my call sign engraved on your dog tags?" Sarah asked, overwhelmed by the significance of what he had done. "It seemed like the right way to honor what you did for us. I never imagined that the person who had saved my life 8 months ago would be the same person who would save my life again when I was brought to this hospital." Marcus's voice was full of wonder. "Sarah, the chances of this happening, of us meeting like this, are so small they're almost impossible." Sarah looked down at the dog tags in her hands, seeing them now not just as a gift from Marcus, but as a tangible connection to a moment when she had helped save his life without ever knowing who he was. "It's like we were meant to find each other." "Maybe we were," Marcus agreed softly. As they sat together in the quiet hospital room, Sarah realized that their connection went far deeper than the professional relationship that had developed over the past 2 weeks. Before they had ever met face to face, she had been a voice in the darkness during one of the most frightening experiences of his life. And now, through an impossible series of circumstances, she had been there again when he needed medical care and support. The boy tags felt warm in her palm as she closed her fingers around them, understanding now why Marcus had wanted her to have them. They represented not just the beginning of their relationship, but the invisible thread that had connected their lives long before either of them realized it existed. The morning of Marcus's discharge arrived with an unseasonably warm October day that felt more like late summer than early autumn. Sarah had barely slept, her mind racing with the implications of what they had discovered about their connection. She arrived at the hospital an hour early, ostensibly to catch up on paperwork, but really because she wanted to see Marcus before he officially became a civilian and their relationship could begin its transformation from professional to personal. When she knocked on his door, Marcus was already dressed in civilian clothes that a friend from his unit had brought him, dark jeans and a blue button-down shirt that made his eyes appear almost green in the morning sunlight streaming through the window. He was sitting in the chair by the window, a small duffel bag at his feet containing all his worldly possessions. "You're here early," he observed, though his smile suggested he was pleased rather than surprised by her arrival. "I wanted to see you off," Sarah replied, settling into the visitor's chair one last time. "How are you feeling about leaving?" "Nervous," Marcus admitted honestly. "It's strange to think that a few hours from now, I'll be completely responsible for taking care of myself again. I haven't lived independently since before I joined the army." He gestured toward his healing leg. "And I've never had to manage physical limitations like this." Sarah understood his apprehension. The transition from hospital to independent living can be challenging, but you've made tremendous progress. Your physical therapy team is confident you'll continue improving, and you have all your follow-up appointments scheduled. "That's not really what I'm nervous about," Marcus said quietly. "What is it then?" Marcus met her eyes directly. "I'm nervous about whether what happened between us in here will translate to the real world. Hospital relationships exist in this strange bubble where normal rules don't really apply. I'm worried that once I'm out there and you're in here, we might discover that what we felt wasn't as real as we thought it was." His honesty touched her, because she had been harboring similar concerns. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted. "But, Marcus, what we discovered about our connection goes back months before we ever met in person. That's not just hospital emotions or gratitude for medical care." "You're right," Marcus agreed. "But it's still scary to take this leap." Dr. Rodriguez arrived with the final discharge paperwork, interrupting their conversation. He reviewed Marcus's medication schedule, physical therapy requirements, and follow-up appointments, then officially signed off on his release from the hospital. "You've been one of our most motivated recovery patients," the doctor told Marcus. "Keep up the excellent work in outpatient therapy, and I expect you'll regain full function of that leg." After Dr. Rodriguez left, Sarah helped Marcus gather his few belongings and walked with him toward the hospital exit. The journey through the corridors felt significant. They were literally walking away from the place where their relationship had developed, heading toward an uncertain future together. At the main entrance, Marcus stopped and turned to face her. "Sarah, I know we talked about seeing each other after my discharge, but I want to make sure you're really comfortable with this. If you've changed your mind, or if you think we should wait longer, I'll understand." Sarah looked at this man who had come into her life in such a dramatic way, thinking about everything she had learned about him over the past weeks. "Marcus, I haven't changed my mind. But I think we should take this slowly and see how things develop naturally." "I'd like that," Marcus replied, relief evident in his voice. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? Somewhere that doesn't serve hospital food?" Sarah laughed, feeling some of her own nervousness dissipate. "I would love to have dinner with you tomorrow night." They exchanged phone numbers and discussed logistics for their first official date. Marcus would be staying at an extended stay hotel about 15 minutes from the hospital, and Sarah suggested a small Italian restaurant she knew that was roughly halfway between his temporary home and her apartment. As Marcus's taxi arrived to take him to his hotel, he turned to Sarah one more time. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything." "Thank you," she replied, "for giving me a reason to believe in impossible coincidences." Sarah watched the taxi pull away, then walked back through the hospital entrance feeling as if her entire world had shifted. She had less than an hour before her shift began, but she found herself walking through the trauma ward, looking at the room where she had first met Marcus and trying to process everything that had happened. Nurse Patterson found her standing in the empty trauma bay 3, looking thoughtful. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how quickly things can change," Sarah replied. 3 weeks ago, I was a single nurse focused entirely on my career. Now I'm going on my first real date in over a year with someone I met under the most unusual circumstances imaginable. "That's how life works sometimes," Nurse Patterson said with a knowing smile. The best things happen when you least expect them. Just remember to keep your feet on the ground while your head is in the clouds. Sarah's shift that day felt different than any she had experienced since starting work at the hospital. Without Marcus to visit and care for, she found herself with more time but less motivation for her usual routines. She provided excellent care to her current patients, but her mind kept drifting to thoughts of their dinner plans and what it would be like to spend time with Marcus outside the hospital environment. That evening, Sarah went home to her apartment and spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to decide what to wear for their date. She finally settled on a simple black dress that was appropriate for the restaurant she had suggested, then spent another 30 minutes worrying about whether she was overdressing or underdressing for the occasion. Mr. Whiskers seemed to sense her nervousness and followed her around the apartment, occasionally sitting on whatever item of clothing she was considering. "What do you think?" she asked him, holding up a blue blouse. "Too casual?" Mr. Whiskers blinked slowly, which she chose to interpret as approval. The next evening, Sarah arrived at Marcello's Italian restaurant 5 minutes early, partly from nervousness and partly because she wanted to see Marcus walk into the restaurant as a civilian rather than as her patient. She had requested a quiet table in the back corner, away from the main dining area, hoping for privacy for what she suspected would be an emotionally significant conversation. When Marcus appeared in the restaurant entrance, Sarah felt her heart skip in a way that confirmed this was definitely not just gratitude or hospital-induced emotions. He looked confident and handsome in dark slacks and a green sweater, moving carefully but without apparent pain. When he spotted her across the restaurant and smiled, she felt the same warm flutter she had experienced every time he smiled at her during his recovery. "You look beautiful," Marcus said as he reached her table, leaning down to kiss her cheek in a gesture that felt both natural and surprisingly intimate. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Sarah replied, noting how different he looked from the injured soldier she had first met. "How are you feeling? How was your first day of complete freedom?" Marcus settled into his chair, adjusting his position slightly to accommodate his healing leg. "Strange, but good. I spent most of the day just walking around the city, getting used to being mobile again. And I called the state university about their engineering program. They said I could start taking classes in the spring semester if I get my application submitted soon." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, genuinely pleased that he was already taking steps toward building a new life. "Are you excited about studying engineering?" "I am, but I'm more excited about having a reason to stay in this area long-term," Marcus replied, his meaning unmistakable. Their conversation was interrupted by a waitress who took their drink orders and left them with menus. As they looked over the food options, Sarah found herself stealing glances at Marcus, still adjusting to seeing him in this new context. "This feels surreal," she admitted. "A month ago, you were unconscious and I was checking your vital signs every 2 hours. Now we're on a date." "It feels surreal to me too," Marcus agreed. "But also right, somehow. Like this is how things were supposed to work out." They ordered dinner and settled into the kind of conversation that had characterized their time together in the hospital, but with a different quality now that they were both free to speak without the constraints of professional boundaries. Marcus told her more about his childhood in Ohio, describing a close-knit family that had been supportive of his military service but was relieved to have him coming home safely. Sarah shared stories about her own family, particularly her parents' journey as immigrants and the sacrifices they had made to ensure she could pursue higher education. She found herself being more open about her fears and ambitions than she had been with anyone in a long time. "What made you choose nursing?" Marcus asked as they waited for their entrees to arrive. "I wanted a career where I could make a direct difference in people's lives," Sarah replied. "But I also liked the idea of work that would always challenge me intellectually and emotionally. Every patient is different, every medical situation requires problem-solving and adaptability." "You're good at it," Marcus observed. "I could tell even when I was barely conscious that you cared about your patients as individuals, not just as medical cases." "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." Sarah paused, twirling her wineglass nervously. "Marcus, can I ask you something that's been on my mind?" "Of course. What was it like, hearing my voice during that radio communication 8 months ago?" Do you remember what I said that made such an impression on you? Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking back to that difficult day. I remember that you sounded calm and confident, even though we were describing a pretty chaotic situation. But what really stuck with me was that you talked to us like we were people, not just voices on a radio. You asked about our names, where we were from, what we were looking forward to when we got home safely. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. I remember doing that with some of the calls. The training emphasized keeping people focused and calm by engaging them in personal conversation. It worked. When everything felt hopeless, your voice reminded us that we had lives worth fighting to get back to. Marcus reached across the table to take her hand. And then, in the hospital, you did the same thing. You talked to me when I was unconscious, you asked about my family and my plans for the future. You made me feel like a person, not just a patient. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, thinking about the incredible series of events that had brought them together. Do you really think it's just coincidence? The chances of us meeting again like this seem almost impossible. I don't know, Marcus admitted. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's fate, maybe it's something else entirely. But I know that I'm grateful it happened, however, it happened. Their dinner arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics as they enjoyed their meal. Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in months, and Marcus seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen him. The easy comfort they had developed during his hospital stay translated perfectly to this new setting. As they finished eating, Marcus grew more serious. Sarah, I want to be completely honest with you about something. What is it? I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. I know it's fast, and I know the circumstances have been unusual, but I wanted you to know where I stand. Sarah felt her breath catch. She had been feeling the same way, but hearing him say the words out loud made it feel more real and more frightening at the same time. Marcus. You don't have to say anything back, he continued quickly. I just wanted to be honest about my feelings. I know this is all moving fast. It is moving fast, Sarah agreed. But, Marcus, I'm falling in love with you too. The admission hung in the air between them, significant and a little scary. They had moved from nurse and patient to something much more profound in the span of just a few weeks, and now they were acknowledging feelings that would change everything about their relationship going forward. So what happens now? Marcus asked. I guess we take it one day at a time and see what develops, Sarah replied. We're both adults, we both know what we're feeling, and we both want to explore where this leads. I'd like that very much, Marcus said, smiling in a way that made Sarah's heart race. As they left the restaurant, Marcus insisted on walking Sarah to her car despite his still healing leg. The October evening was cool but pleasant, and Sarah found herself wishing the night didn't have to end. When can I see you again? Marcus asked as they reached her car. I'm working the next 3 nights, but I'm off this weekend, Sarah told him. Would you like to come to my apartment for dinner Saturday? I promise to cook something better than hospital food. I would love that, Marcus replied, then leaned down to kiss her softly on the lips. The kiss was gentle and brief, but it sent electricity through Sarah's entire body. When they separated, she could see in Marcus's eyes that he had felt the same intensity. Drive safely, he said, stepping back to give her space to get into her car. I will. Take care of yourself, and don't overdo the physical therapy this week. As Sarah drove home, she found herself replaying every moment of the evening. The transition from their hospital relationship to something romantic had felt natural and right, confirming that their connection was based on genuine compatibility rather than just the emotional intensity of his recovery period. At home, Mr. Whiskers greeted her with unusual enthusiasm, as if he could sense that something significant had happened. Sarah sat on her couch with the cat in her lap, thinking about how dramatically her life had changed in just a few short weeks. The dog tags that Marcus had given her were hanging from her bedside lamp, where she could see them every morning when she woke up. They had become a tangible reminder not just of their relationship, but of the mysterious way their lives had been connected long before they ever met face to face. As she got ready for bed, Sarah realized that for the first time in her adult life, she was genuinely excited about the possibility of building a future with someone. Marcus had entered her life under the most dramatic circumstances possible, but their relationship was developing into something stable and real and full of potential. The next morning, Sarah found a text message from Marcus waiting on her phone. "Thank you for a perfect evening. Already looking forward to Saturday. Hope your shift goes well today." She responded immediately, "Thank you too. It was perfect. See you Saturday at 6. As she got ready for work, Sarah felt a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before Marcus came into her life. She was still the same dedicated nurse, still committed to providing excellent patient care, but now she had something personal to look forward to beyond her professional responsibilities. Her colleagues at the hospital immediately noticed the change in her demeanor. "Someone had a good date last night," Nurse Patterson observed with a knowing smile. "It was a very good date," Sarah confirmed, unable to suppress her own smile. "I'm happy for you," Nurse Patterson said sincerely. "You deserve someone who appreciates how special you are." That evening, as Sarah made rounds in the trauma ward, she paused outside the room where she had first met Marcus. A new patient occupied the bed now, a young woman who had been in a car accident. Sarah provided the same attentive care she had always given to her patients, but she found herself thinking about how random chance and professional dedication had led her to the most important relationship of her life. The dog tags that Marcus had worn during his darkest moments overseas, engraved with the call sign she had used during her volunteer work, had somehow found their way back to her through an impossible series of coincidences. But, as Sarah continued her rounds that night, she began to think that maybe it wasn't coincidence at all. Maybe some connections are meant to happen, even when the path that leads to them seems impossible to predict. Saturday afternoon found Sarah in her small kitchen, attempting to prepare dinner for Marcus while simultaneously battling her own nervousness about having him in her personal space for the first time. She had decided on homemade chicken parmesan with pasta, partly because it was one of the few dishes she felt confident preparing, and partly because Marcus had mentioned missing his mother's Italian cooking during one of their hospital conversations. Mr. Whiskers supervised her cooking efforts from his perch on the kitchen counter, occasionally offering unhelpful commentary in the form of loud meowing whenever she opened a cabinet he thought might contain treats. Sarah had spent the morning cleaning her apartment and rearranging furniture to accommodate Marcus's limited mobility, though his physical therapy had progressed remarkably well over the past week. At exactly 6 o'clock, Sarah heard a knock on her apartment door. When she opened it, Marcus stood in the hallway holding a small bouquet of yellow roses and wearing an expression that suggested he was as nervous as she felt. "These are beautiful," Sarah said, accepting the flowers and inhaling their subtle fragrance. "How did you know yellow roses are my favorite?" "I didn't," Marcus admitted, following her into the apartment. "I asked the florist what flowers would be appropriate for a dinner with someone special, and she said yellow roses represent friendship and new beginnings. That seemed like exactly what we needed." Sarah found a vase for the roses and placed them on her small dining table, which she had set with her grandmother's china and the cloth napkins she usually reserved for special occasions. That was perfect reasoning. "Would you like something to drink? I have wine, beer, or I can make coffee." "Wine sounds good," Marcus replied, looking around the apartment with obvious interest. "This is really nice, Sarah. It feels like you." The comment pleased her more than she had expected. Her apartment was small but comfortable, decorated with photographs from hiking trips and a few pieces of artwork from local artists. It was exactly the kind of space she had always imagined for herself, cozy and personal without being cluttered. "Thank you. It's not much, but it's home." Sarah poured 2 glasses of red wine and handed one to Marcus. "Dinner should be ready in about 20 minutes. Make yourself comfortable." Marcus settled onto her couch, and Mr. Whiskers immediately appeared to investigate the newcomer. To Sarah's delight, the cat seemed to approve of Marcus, allowing himself to be petted and even purring loudly when Marcus found the right spot behind his ears. "He's very social," Marcus observed as Mr. Whiskers settled beside him on the couch. "He's usually shy around strangers," Sarah said, surprised by her cat's immediate acceptance of Marcus. "I think he has good instincts about people." As Sarah finished preparing dinner, She could hear Marcus talking quietly to Mr. Whiskers, and the comfortable domestic sound made her realize how much she had missed having someone to share her home with. Since graduating nursing school and moving into her own apartment, she had been focused entirely on her career, but Marcus's presence reminded her how much more fulfilling life could be when shared with the right person. "Dinner's ready," she announced, carrying plates to the small dining table. Marcus joined her at the table, moving with only a slight limp that was barely noticeable unless someone knew to look for it. "This smells incredible. You didn't tell me you were such a good cook." "Let's see if you still think that after you taste it," Sarah replied, suddenly worried that her cooking wouldn't live up to his expectations. The meal exceeded both their expectations. Sarah's chicken parmesan was perfectly seasoned, and the pasta was cooked exactly right. More importantly, the conversation flowed as easily as it had during their first date, ranging from Marcus's progress in physical therapy to Sarah's experiences with her most challenging patients. "I have some news," Marcus said as they finished eating. "I submitted my application to the state university yesterday, and I have an appointment with an academic advisor next week to discuss class schedules for the spring semester." "Marcus, that's wonderful." Sarah felt genuinely excited about his news. "What courses are you planning to start with?" "Basic math and science requirements, mostly. It's been several years since I was in school, so I want to ease back into academic work gradually." Marcus paused, studying Sarah's face carefully. "The advisor said that if I maintain good grades, I could potentially graduate with an engineering degree in about 3 years. 3 years, Sarah repeated, understanding the significance of that timeline. If their relationship continued developing, 3 years would give them plenty of time to build something solid and permanent together. "Sarah, I want to talk to you about something important," Marcus continued, his tone becoming more serious. "What is it?" Marcus reached across the table to take her hand. "I know we've only been seeing each other outside the hospital for a week, and I know this relationship has developed under unusual circumstances. But I want you to know that I'm thinking about this as a long-term situation, not just a short-term romance." Sarah felt her heart begin beating faster. "What do you mean by long-term?" "I mean that I can see myself falling completely in love with you, and I can imagine building a future together. Marriage, maybe children eventually, definitely a shared life that goes beyond just dating." Marcus's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I want to be honest about what I'm hoping for, even if it's too early to make specific plans." Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing sincerity and hope and a vulnerability that touched her deeply. "Marcus, I've been thinking about the same things. This feels different than anything I've experienced before, and I can see the possibility of a real future together too. Even though we haven't known each other very long?" "Sometimes you just know," Sarah replied, surprised by her own certainty. "And we have known each other longer than it seems, even if we didn't realize it at the time." Marcus smiled, and Sarah saw relief and happiness in his expression. "So we're both thinking about this as potentially serious?" "We are," Sarah confirmed. "But let's also agree to take our time and let things develop naturally. There's no rush to make major decisions right now." "Agreed. But I'm glad we're both thinking in the same direction." After dinner, they moved to the couch to watch a movie, though neither of them paid much attention to what was playing on the television. Instead, they talked about their childhoods, their dreams for the future, and the small daily details that help two people really get to know each other. Sarah learned that Marcus had been an excellent student in high school but had joined the military partly because his family couldn't afford college tuition. He had always been interested in engineering and had spent his spare time overseas reading textbooks and taking correspondence courses to prepare for eventual college enrollment. Marcus learned that Sarah had originally planned to become a doctor but had switched to nursing after volunteering at a local hospital during high school. She loved the direct patient care that nursing provided and had never regretted her decision, though she sometimes considered pursuing additional education to become a nurse practitioner. As the evening progressed, they grew more comfortable with casual physical contact. Sarah found herself leaning against Marcus's shoulder as they talked, and he obsessively played with her hair in a gesture that felt both intimate and completely natural. When Mr. Whiskers joined them on the couch, settling across both their laps, it felt like a perfectly domestic scene. I should probably head back to the hotel, Marcus said reluctantly as the clock approached 10 o'clock. I don't want to overstay my welcome on our second date. You're not overstaying, Sarah assured him, though she appreciated his consideration. But, you're probably right about not rushing things. As Marcus prepared to leave, he turned to Sarah with a more serious expression. There's something I've been wanting to tell you, something I haven't shared with anyone else. What is it? Marcus was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. The blast that injured my leg wasn't the first time I'd been hurt overseas. There was another incident about 6 months before that, during the mission where you provided radio support. Sarah felt a chill of concern. You were injured during that mission? The one where I talked you through the medical procedures? I was hurt, but not seriously. Some shrapnel in my shoulder and a minor concussion. But, Sarah, the reason I was so insistent on getting that call sign engraved on my dog tags wasn't just gratitude for the rescue coordination. Marcus met her eyes directly. It was because during those hours when we were pinned down and I was worried we might not make it out alive, your voice was the only thing that kept me calm enough to function. Marcus. Sarah began, but he continued before she could finish. I know this sounds dramatic, but I honestly believe that hearing your voice that day saved my life in more ways than just the medical coordination. It saved my sanity and my hope. Marcus reached for her hands. And then, when I was unconscious in the hospital and started to wake up, the first thing I was aware of was your voice again. It was like finding an anchor in the confusion. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as the full significance of their connection became even clearer. You're saying that my voice was important to you before you ever knew who I was? Your voice was the most important sound in my world on 2 of the worst days of my life, Marcus confirmed. And, now, finding out that the person who provided that comfort was also the person I was going to fall in love with, it feels like more than coincidence. Sarah stood up and moved closer to Marcus, placing her hands on his face and looking directly into his eyes. Marcus, I need to tell you something too. What? That radio support shift, the day of your mission, was going to be my last day in the volunteer program. I had decided that the emotional stress was too much to handle along with my regular coursework. Sarah's voice became softer. But something about that particular mission, something about the voices I heard on the radio that day, made me feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. You were thinking about quitting? I was. But, after that day, I stayed in the program for 2 more months because I realized how much the work meant to me. Sarah smiled through her tears. I never knew until now that one of those voices belonged to you. Marcus pulled her closer, and they stood together in her living room, holding each other and trying to process the incredible series of connections that had brought them to this moment. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, I think I've been waiting for you my entire life, even before I knew you existed. I think I've been waiting for you too, she replied, and, when he kissed her this time, it was with a depth of emotion that confirmed everything they had been discovering about their feelings for each other. 3 months later, Sarah was finishing her shift at the hospital when she received a text message from Marcus, meet me in the lobby when you get off work. I have something to show you. She found him waiting by the main entrance, looking excited and slightly nervous. He was walking without any visible limp now, his physical therapy having been completely successful, and he was carrying what appeared to be an official-looking envelope. What's going on? Sarah asked, noting his barely contained excitement. I got accepted, Marcus said, holding up the envelope. The university accepted my application, and I'm starting classes next month. Sarah squealed with excitement and threw her arms around him, causing several people in the hospital lobby to turn and smile at their obvious happiness. Marcus, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. There's more, Marcus continued, pulling a smaller envelope from his jacket pocket. I also got approved for the apartment I applied for. It's about 10 minutes from campus and about 15 minutes from here. Sarah looked at the second envelope, understanding the significance of his choice to find housing that was convenient to both his school and her workplace. You're really doing this. You're starting your new life here. I'm starting our new life here, Marcus corrected gently. If you're ready for that. Sarah looked at this man who had come into her life in such a dramatic way and had become the most important person in her world. She thought about the dog tags hanging in her bedroom, about the impossible coincidences that had brought them together, and about the future they could build together. "I'm ready," she said, and when he kissed her in the hospital lobby where they had first met, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that some connections are meant to last a lifetime. 6 months later, Marcus graduated from his first semester of college with perfect grades, and Sarah received a promotion to senior nurse in the trauma unit. They celebrated both achievements at the same Italian restaurant where they had their first date, and Marcus presented Sarah with a small velvet box. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, seeing her surprised expression. "Well, not yet, anyway." Sarah opened the box to find a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant that had been engraved with RB7 Alpha. "Marcus, it's beautiful," she breathed, understanding immediately why he had chosen this particular gift. "I thought you should have something that represents how we found each other," he explained as he fastened the necklace around her neck. "And someday, when we're ready for engagement rings and wedding planning, I want you to know that what we have started long before we ever met face to face." Sarah touched the pendant, feeling the same sense of connection she had experienced when Marcus first gave her his dog tags. "I love it. And I love you." "I love you too," Marcus replied. "And, Sarah?" "Yes? I'm ready for engagement rings and wedding planning whenever you are." Sarah looked across the table at the man who had been saved by her voice twice, who had waited months to thank the anonymous volunteer who had guided his rescue, and who had somehow found his way back to her through an impossible series of events. She thought about the future they were building together, about the children they might have someday who would grow up hearing the incredible story of how their parents met. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said, smiling at the hope and happiness in his eyes. "I will," Marcus promised, and Sarah knew without any doubt that he would keep that promise, just as he had kept every other commitment he had made to her since that first night when he had seized her wrist and begun their journey toward love. As they walked out of the restaurant together, Sarah fingered the pendant at her throat and thought about how the call sign that had once been just a random assignment had become the symbol of the most important relationship of her life. Some stories, she realized, begin long before the people in them understand that they're part of something larger than coincidence. Some connections are forged in moments of crisis and discover their true meaning only when the people involved are ready to recognize what they've found in each other. The dog tags that Marcus had worn through 2 traumatic experiences were now safely stored in Sarah's jewelry box, replaced around her neck by a pendant that celebrated not just their love, but the mysterious way that love had found them across time and distance and impossible odds. And every morning when Sarah woke up and saw that pendant on her nightstand, she was reminded that some calls for help are answered in ways that change everything, forever.